Due Weather 6813. Strange encounter in the woods. I live near a patch of woods, not far from a few camping sites. There's an old basketball court close by. Stone floor, two rusty hoops that barely stay up. It's pretty busted, but it's still our go-to spot when my friends and I want to hang out. It was a warm day last summer. We headed out to play some basketball, mess around, and just chill. Everything was normal at first, just us fucking around. Then we heard barking. It wasn't loud at first, but it felt off, like the pitch kept changing. Sometimes it sounded close, sometimes super far away, almost like it was moving around fast. My friend shrugged it off. Some dog from one of the campsites nearby. I didn't say much. Didn't want to seem weird for being creeped out by a dog. We kept playing. About 10 minutes later, I missed the shot pretty bad, and the ball bounced off deep into the woods. Of course, they made me go grab it since I was the one who messed up. As I walked toward it, something felt off. I couldn't explain why, just had that tight feeling in my gut, like I shouldn't be there. The barking kicked in again, this time louder, like it was really close. Still, I didn't want to make a big deal, so I kept going. I bent down to pick up the ball, and that's when it hit me. This sharp pain in my palm, out of nowhere. Almost like my body was screaming at me to get out. I grabbed the ball and ran back, hand throbbing like crazy. I told my friends I was done for the day, that my hand hurt too much to play. They asked what happened, but I just said I didn't know. They kept playing, and I sat off to the side, trying to chill out, hoping the pain would go away. After a while, the barking stopped. Things went quiet. Then I realized I had to pee, like really bad. Asked if they wanted to go home yet, but they said no, they were still having fun. So I walked behind the court, deeper into the woods where they couldn't see me, and relieved myself. That's when things got creepy again. I felt like someone was watching me, not just nearby, right there, like behind a tree or something. It was quiet, too quiet. Then, as I started walking back, the barking started again. This time it was loud, and it honestly felt like it was right behind me. My hands started hurting again, even worse than before. I ran back and told my friends I had to leave, made up some excuse about needing to help my mom. As soon as I got farther from the woods, everything started to feel normal again. Pain faded, barking stopped. I never really talked about it, figured no one would believe me or they'd just laugh it off. But something happened that day, and it still messes with me a little bit. I don't know what it was. My best guess is a skinwalker.
Mystery Man 82, The Man. I'm a male, 26, and this happened around 3 years ago when the U.S. was practically recovered from COVID. I used to live in Long Island, New York, which is where this story takes place. For just a quick backstory for those who didn't grow up in NY, there is a huge railroad that connects lots of towns together, and the farthest it goes up to NYC. I took a business opportunity where I needed to go up to the city every day for work as an engineer, and I would get on the train to go to the city as early as 6 a.m., and getting home sometimes it would be as late as 11 p.m. Before taking this opportunity, I was never on the railroad during times like this, and I quickly came to learn that it was practically the same people on the train each time, all people going to the city and back for work, and I normally saw no new faces on my rides going there and back. One day, though, that changed. I was on a late train, probably around 10 or 11 p.m. at night during the winter time, so it was as dark as the night got around those times. I ran to catch the railroad on time to get me home, so as you can normally expect, no matter the time, I couldn't find a seat on the train. I chose to stand next to the doors and was accompanied by two men who looked around my age, just chopping up good conversation, and a man. He looked about to be in his late 50s. He was wearing a sort of Hawaiian shirt, which was unbuttoned around 2 buttons, and his chest hair stuck out. He wore khakis, a belt, and attached to his shirt pocket, he had what seemed to be a business key card on a retractable wire, which the clear sleeve it was in was yellowing. He was white, balding, but the hair I could see was gray, and he was more heavy-set, but what I really remember are his eyes. Normally these kinds of details wouldn't be so prominent in my mind, but his mannerisms were nothing but out of the ordinary. The way this man examined the other two standing next to the doors, the ones in deep conversation, it was uncanny. His eyes were deep in their sockets. They were downturned, so the insides of his eyes closer to his nose were higher set than the outside corners, with a look that was so tired and sad, and his lips stayed in such a pouting expression that it nearly looked like he was taking sympathy for these men. The worst part? Every time they would make a joke, they would chuckle, but he would laugh, loud, louder than anyone would if they were even supposed to be included in the conversation. Just to keep my own privacy, I won't disclose which town exactly on Long Island I lived in, but I will say it is one of the last stops of the train. The man definitely made me unsettled, but I didn't think to change my spot on the train. It was packed, and I was on the very first cart, so that when I got to my destination, I could leave as soon as possible. I figured that I would wait to see if this man got off on one of the stops before me, and I wish I didn't. He didn't seem like a threat to me because he was so hyper-focused on these two guys. But once we got to their stop, he took a few steps, basically following them out the cart, until he saw me. I was staring. I'm not proud of it, but I had two headphones in listening to music, and I felt like this man had to be studied, and I accidentally just drew all the attention to myself. Something in his eyes switched for just a second, but it was horrifying. His eyes looked joyful, full of some type of childlike joy on Christmas or their birthday, and right then it was as if his feet just stopped, like they were dried in concrete, and he just stayed on the train. That is when I wanted to scream. We were a few stops away from my stop, and I had no doubt in my mind that if this guy seeing me made him stop from getting off at one stop, there is only one other stop he will get off at. Mine. Now, I know this sounds like the dumbest thing ever, but I walked home from getting off the train. I'm a big guy, not super tall, but tall enough that most guys don't tower over me, and I'm not weak, so I never had anything to really worry about. Yeah, I wasn't scared of this guy himself and what he could do, but it's more of his intentions. I'm a guy who wouldn't fight someone for fun, and it's something that would be my last resort, and the last thing I wanted to do was throw hands with this man with such a sorrowful look in his eyes. Then, it was my stop. I got off, and with no surprise, he did too. I started walking at a pace that didn't scream, "I'm scared," or "I need to get away," but it was at a pace that looked normal for me. But peering behind my shoulder, I saw him matching my pace, and it looked so unnatural, uncomfortable, like it hurt for him to walk at that pace. He continued to follow my pace, and no stores nearby were open for me to go to, so as I approached my house, I remember the hill that you had to climb to reach the street, and looking at the man still matching my pace to the very best of his abilities, he looked exhausted, so I just had to pray that he wouldn't be able to climb the hill as fast as I did. I approached the bottom of the hill and sprinted as fast as I could and didn't stop until I reached my house and jumped over my backyard fence instead of going up to my front porch to open the front door on the chance he followed me fast enough to see me enter my house. My back door is a sliding door, however, and I couldn't unlock it unless I was in the house, so the only thing I could do was sit and wait in a bush, and I wasn't too scared of him seeing me in the pitch dark, but I was scared of him hearing me if I moved too much. I peered through my fence as I saw him climb up the hill, walking at a more comfortable-looking pace for him. He started looking around, looking for a sign of me. Nothing. He approached closer, just looking around my street, and under a streetlight, I saw him. More like I saw his eyes, full of rage, no longer the joyful or sorrowful eyes I had once seen. I watched him pace back and forth on the road for a long time, until eventually he turned around and went down the hill once again. I waited for a long time before going into my house and going to bed. The next day I took off of work. I went to the police and made a report, And for the rest of the day, I decided that I wouldn't go straight from my stop on the railroad to the city anymore, and found a string of having to hop off one train to another around 3 times before going to the city in hopes that the man would take the direct route. I never saw the man after that. This is the first time I had fully retold the story since it had happened, and I apologize for how long it is. But every time I even think about this story for too long, it reminds me of the people that are out there, and you have no idea what intentions they have behind their eyes. Stay safe, everyone, and thank you for listening to my story.
Jimmy, he is watching me? Strange. Hello, I'd prefer to keep my name anonymous for now, so let me get straight to the point. I'm from Florida, and I've always loved traveling and discovering new places. A month ago, I decided to take my first trip abroad, to Iraq. I was curious about its culture and history, and I thought it would be an adventure. Unfortunately, it turned out to be my first and last trip overseas. When I landed in Iraq, I met a man who offered to help me find an apartment. He said he could get me a spacious, modern, fully furnished place for a reasonable price. It sounded convenient, so I agreed to rent it for $400 for 1 month. After a long day of walking around the city and soaking in the new sights, I finally reached the apartment late at night, completely exhausted. I'd read somewhere that people in the Arab world sometimes sleep on their rooftops during warm nights to enjoy the fresh air. I thought that would be an interesting thing to try. So I grabbed a mattress, carried it up to the roof, laid it out, and fell asleep almost immediately around 10 p.m. I was so tired that I didn't even notice anything around me, until about 4 hours later, when something woke me up. I opened my eyes and felt this strange, chilling feeling that I wasn't alone. I looked around in the darkness and, to my horror, saw half of a man's head peeking over the edge of the neighboring rooftop. He was just sitting there, completely still, staring straight at me. His breathing sounded slow and oddly cold, and there was this faint, unsettling smile on his face. It was so dark that I couldn't see his full face or even his skin tone clearly. I froze in place, unable to move or even think straight for a few seconds. Finally, instinct kicked in. I jumped up, grabbed my phone, ran down the stairs, and locked myself inside. My hands were shaking as I called the local police and told them that someone was spying on me from the next rooftop. I filed a report, and about 2 hours later, the police went into the man's place. They found him drunk, holding a knife. He was apparently planning to come over and attack me while I slept. When the police questioned him, he tried to twist the story and said that I was the one who had threatened him and told him I'd break into his house. None of that was true. Thankfully, the police realized he was lying and arrested him. He turned out to be mentally unstable and dangerous. That night, I stayed awake, grateful that I had woken up in time. Early the next morning, I booked the first flight back to Florida to be with my family. Right now, I'm on the plane writing this down to get it off my chest. This was one of the scariest moments of my life. I've always believed that travel makes you wiser, but it also teaches you that danger can show up anywhere. I truly hope I never see that man again. And to anyone reading this, please, always be careful when you travel. Some adventures aren't worth the risk.
Flat Vegetable 9028, the scariest night of my life. July 14th, 1992. I remember the date because it was the night the world went black, literally. I was working the graveyard shift as a security guard at a closed factory in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. The entire factory was shut down for vacation, meaning it was completely empty. My job was simple: to sit in my car in the parking lot and ensure no one entered the building. I wasn't allowed inside, which meant my car was my only post, my only shelter. The air had been heavy all evening, but no one expected what hit us. To pass the time, I had the radio on low, tuned to the Major League Baseball All-Star Game from Jack Murphy Stadium. The comforting thwack of bat on ball, the roar of the crowd, the announcer's smooth voice. It was a small piece of normalcy in the quiet, isolated factory. A thunderstorm rolled in with a sudden, violent fury. One moment, the rhythmic hum of the factory's distant generators was my only company. The next, the world outside exploded. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a banshee. Suddenly, the baseball game was interrupted by the jarring, urgent tone of the emergency alert system. A robotic voice cut through the static. "Tornado warning! Seek shelter immediately!" A jolt of terror went through me. Then, with a definitive thunk, the power went out. Inside the sprawling, silent factory, the emergency lights kicked on, casting an unsettling, glowing red like embers in a dying furnace, barely visible through the sheets of rain and the momentary flashes of lightning. It was like looking into the eyes of some dormant beast. Outside, though, the darkness was absolute. The parking lot lights, usually a beacon, were dead, swallowed by the storm. I peered into the pitch-black abyss, unable to see more than a few feet in front of me. That's when it hit. A terrifying, splintering crash that sent a tremor through the pavement and up into my seat. The sound, impossibly loud, seemed to hang in the air, its echo stretching into an agonizing eternity, even as the storm raged. It was close, too close. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to know what happened. I had to get out. Fumbling for the ignition, I started my Ford Escort, its engine coughing to life a small, fragile island of noise in the howling chaos. I edged the car forward, my headlights cutting twin beams into the pitch-black void of the curvy driveway. The rain was a solid wall, making every foot of progress feel like driving blind. Then the beam caught it, filling the entire exit. Sprawling like a monstrous broken limb was a giant oak tree, its colossal trunk having ripped from the earth. It had smashed the company sign to splinters, completely blocking the only way out. I was trapped, alone, in the dark, with the echoes of a tornado warning still ringing in my ears, and I had no idea what was out there. The eye of the storm. With no cell phone in 1992, contacting anyone was impossible. I was truly on my own. Trapped and isolated, I huddled in my Ford Escort, the only refuge against the unseen fury outside. Then, amidst the pandemonium, a sudden, unnerving silence began to creep in. The roaring wind faded to a whisper. The deluge softened to a drizzle. A strange, deceptive calm settled over the factory, like the world was holding its breath. Against my better judgment, a desperate need to understand the chaos, to see the extent of the damage, pulled me from the relative safety of my car. I opened the door and stepped out into the strange, humid stillness. I couldn't see much in the lingering darkness, just the vague outlines of debris and the looming factory. But the respite was brutally short-lived. Before I could fully survey the destruction, the storm resumed with a vengeance. It didn't roll back in, it exploded around me. The wind shrieked, instantly tearing at my clothes. Rain turned from drops to a solid, icy sheet, blinding me. I had to run, stumbling through the renewed deluge, scrambling back to the flimsy shelter of my car. By the time I slammed the door shut, I was soaking wet, shivering, not just from the cold, but from the gut-wrenching terror of being caught in that sudden, overwhelming assault. The wind was a physical force, shaking my Ford Escort violently. It felt like a giant hand was pushing against the roof, threatening to roll the car over. Then, adding to the nightmare, a tree branch was blown directly under my car. It lodged there, scraping and scratching against the undercarriage with an eerie, rhythmic sound that grated on my nerves. The rain intensified, a relentless downpour that turned the windshield into a blurred, opaque wall. I couldn't see anything. I was just a small, vulnerable target in the heart of the storm. Suddenly, the baseball game on the radio was interrupted again by the familiar, chilling tone of the emergency alert system. Another tornado warning. It felt like lightning was striking all around my car, not with a crash, but with a series of sharp, terrifying clicks. One particularly close strike illuminated the darkness for a split second, and I saw a spark shoot up into the air nearby, only to fizzle out just as quickly. For the next 10 minutes, I sat there, frozen behind the wheel, unable to move, unable to think of anything but the terrifying power unleashed outside. Dawn and relief. Then, just as abruptly as it had arrived, the storm completely stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ringing in my ears. I cautiously got out of my car, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and crushed leaves. I reached down and pulled the offending tree branch from under my Escort. Leaning against the still shaking car, I listened, and in the distance I heard the faint, comforting wail of sirens. Within 30 minutes, a Cuyahoga Falls police officer spotted me from the road, his spotlight cutting through the lingering gloom. The sight of another human being, even just a silhouette in the beam of a flashlight, brought an overwhelming wave of relief. The factory owner arrived around 2 a.m., and by 8 a.m., the colossal tree that had trapped me was finally removed. I later learned that a tornado had indeed touched down in Cuyahoga Falls that night, just over a mile from where I was. Thinking about how close I came, about the absolute isolation and terror I had felt, filled me with a profound sense of gratitude. I felt happy just to be alive. And for the record, the American League won the All-Star game 13-6.
My grandma used to tell me scary stories when I was little. There's one I'll never forget. I was 10 years old when Grandma came to live with us. It was about 6 months after Granddad passed away, and I guess, looking back, she must have been lonely in that big house of theirs, rattling around with only the grief and memories for company. So, despite a few protests from Mom, my parents took her in. There were no protests for me, none at all. Grandma was loud and fun, and I loved her. She had an almost limitless supply of boiled sweets, and she'd always slip me a couple whenever she saw me. She was always the first to stick up for me when I got in trouble, too. But it was her stories I loved best. Grandma had all kinds of stories. Stories about growing up during WW2, and stories about things she'd get up to with her friends on the South Coast after her family had been evacuated. Sad stories, funny stories, adventure stories. But it was her scary stories that were my favorite. Grandma had lots of scary stories. She told me she dabbled in the occult when she was a teenager, trying out Ouija boards with her friends. Tarot cards, fortune-telling, all that stuff. Most of the stories I'd laugh off or forget about not long after she was done telling them. But there were a couple that really did spook me a bit. I was only 10 at the time, you have to understand, and Grandma certainly knew how to bring the stories to life. She'd shut off the lights in my room, so only the glow of the night sky shone through the curtains, and she'd shuffle in real close. Close enough so I could see the wrinkles on her face and smell the boiled sweets on her breath. Close enough so her deep blue eyes could stare straight into mine. She must have given me nightmares with a few of those tales. But now, years later, there's only one that I can still remember. Only one that stuck with me. The story about the shower and Mr. Longfingers. Grandma told me about Mr. Longfingers one night after I asked about her baths. Grandma used to love her baths. She'd spent ages in them, light candles and incense, and lie in the tub humming to herself until the water turned cold. It drove my mom crazy. But when I asked her why she loved them so much, she said it was the only place she could relax. It was the only place that was safe for her to relax. You know, people like me who are, well, more sensitive to certain things, we have to have baths,
she told me seriously one night, shuffling closer on the bed. I couldn't possibly spend that long in the shower. It'd be far too risky. Grandma stared at me with those blue eyes of hers, unsmiling, and I knew it was time for one of her stories, one of the scary ones. I shivered with pleasure and pulled the covers up to my chin. Why is it risky, Grandma? She half turned to look out the window, watching me from the corner of her eye, pausing for effect. I waited, feeling my heart rate pick up ever so slightly in my chest. Well, it's only risky if you close your eyes, of course, if you close your eyes for longer than 10 seconds. What do you mean? Why? Well, do you ever play that game in the playground with your friends? The one where someone turns their back and the others sneak up on them when they're not looking? I nodded, and Grandma nodded back. Exactly. So that's what it's like in the shower, when you have your eyes closed. That's what it's like with Mr. Longfingers. A cold itch tickled back. Who's Mr. Longfingers, Grandma? She let out a deep breath, as if she wished she hadn't said anything, turned her head back to face mine. When she next spoke, she had lowered her voice. No one knows exactly, Grandma whispered. Some think it's a creature that's attracted to the heat and smell we give off in there. Others think it's a demon that finds a way into our realm through the dense steam clouds. No one can say for sure, because the only ones who have actually seen Mr. Longfingers aren't ever going to be able to tell you. Why not, Grandma? Grandma shuffled closer along the bed and leaned towards me, leaving my question hanging in the air. Don't you worry about it, sweetheart. Don't worry your pretty head. As long as you remember the rules, you'll be fine. What rules? Well, when you're in the shower, you try not to close your eyes for too long. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too. But any longer than that... Yeah, then what? Well, any longer than that, and you may just start to feel something in the room with you. Something watching. And if you ever go longer than 15 seconds, that's when you might start to hear a noise too. Hear what? The soft tap, tap, tap of fingers on glass. Fingers drumming against the glass door of the shower cubicle. If you ever do hear that noise, God forbid, will you make me a promise? What, Grandma? Promise me you'll never open your eyes. I barely slept that night, hardly at all. I'd close my eyes and try to relax, but every time I did, I'd imagine a face pressed against my bedroom window staring in at me. And when I did finally get to sleep, I had nightmares, bad ones. I had them all week, in fact. Dreams of disembodied eyes watching me in the dark and long fingers reaching out to touch my exposed skin. It wasn't any better when I was awake either, not really. The shower was the worst. That's when Grandma's story really got to me. I'd never thought about it before, but suddenly I had trouble shutting my eyes in there. I'd be standing beneath the beating water, shampoo running down my face, and as soon as I squinted my eyelids closed, I hear Grandma's words running through my head. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too, but any longer than that. I'd rub my hair fast, feeling the shampoo dripping off my chin, and as soon as I'd counted past 5 seconds, I'd feel it. A sort of pressure. Not a feeling of being watched exactly, but something close to that. I'd run my fingers faster and faster through my hair, frantically trying to get the suds out of my hair. And the ready blackness behind my closed eyes with the rush of water in my ears would feel like a held breath, like the silence before a scream. The seconds would race through my mind, and I'd be so desperate to open my eyes again that I'd sometimes do it before my hair was rinsed fully clean, and my eyes would sting with shampoo. But before I shut them again, I'd always be sure to peer out through the steamed glass door of the shower cubicle, just to make sure I was still alone. It wasn't long before Mom realized something was up. She heard me crying out in my sleep one night and came in to comfort me, asked me what the matter was, and it all came out. I told her about Grandma's stories and about Mr. Longfingers. She got this look on her face when I was telling her, like she used to get with me when I'd made her really angry. This wide-eyed, angry look. Only this time, she wasn't angry with me. She was angry with Grandma. My parents' room was next to mine, and sometimes, if I pressed my ear against the wall, I could hear them talking in there. Soft whispers. That night, though, after Mom was satisfied I wasn't scared anymore, and she'd gone back to her room, the whispers weren't soft at all. Oh no. I heard Mom hissing to Dad about Grandma, about the story she'd told me. Mom's voice floated through the wall, sharp and crisp. "You know what your fucking mother has said to him now, don't you, Simon?" Dad's response was an intelligible mutter. "She's told him there's a monster that will get him if he shuts his eyes in the shower. A monster. The poor kid has been having nightmares about it all week. Seriously, Simon, you'd better say something to her tomorrow morning, first thing, or I will." Grandma came to visit me in my room the following night. That time, as she perched on the end of my bed, there were no stories, nothing like that. Grandma just sat there and stared down at me, her blue eyes wide and sad. The light from the moon outside my window lit up her wrinkled face. "You know I'd never let anything bad happen to you, don't you?" I nodded my head. "I know, Grandma." "You know I'd let you come to no harm?" I nodded again. "Okay, good, that's good." She looked away from me for a moment, out the window. "You know, the things I tell you in the evening are meant to help you, sweetheart. They're meant to toughen you up a bit, protect you." She paused and shook her head. "But maybe your mom's right. Maybe I went too far this time." She looked down at me and smiled. But even then, even though I was only 10 years old, I could tell it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll tell you what. You know what I told you about Mr. Longfingers in the shower? Well, I'm going to make sure you're safe. I'll scare the bastard off. How about that? It won't come back in a hurry if it has to face me." I stared up at Grandma, watching her face glow in the moonlight, watching her smile down at me. I nodded my head once. I was the one who found her. I don't know when exactly it happened, but I'd guess it was about a week after we had that talk in my room, after she told me she wouldn't let me come to any harm. I woke early that morning from a bad dream to a heavy thumping sound. I sat bolt upright in bed. My room was quiet around me, and I couldn't hear anything from the wall that joined my parents' room either. But the house wasn't entirely silent. Floating down the hall, muffled by my closed door, I heard the sound of rushing water, the noise of the shower. I leapt out of bed and ran down the upstairs hallway, heart already pounding in my chest. As soon as I reached the closed bathroom door, I started banging on it. A deep terror was welling up inside me like cold water from a well, something I couldn't place, and I kept banging and shouting, "Grandma!" over and over again, even though she didn't respond. Off to my right, I was dimly aware of voices from my parents' room, the sleepy shuffle of footsteps. But before they had a chance to make it out onto the landing, I'd lifted my hand to test out the door handle, more out of instinct than because I thought it might actually open. But the door wasn't locked. I kept banging with my free hand, and it swung suddenly inwards, bringing me face to face with a wall of steam. Heat struck my skin. I squinted my eyes against the damp fog and peered into the bathroom. And before Dad pushed me to one side, before everything around me descended into shouting and tears and chaos, I saw her. I saw Grandma. She was lying naked on the floor in the shower cubicle, the water beating down around her, blue eyes bulging from her face. One hand was curled against her chest like a dead bird, while the other trailed against the glass of the shower cubicle, the flailing finger marks she'd carved through the steam still clear and fresh. It was a heart attack that killed her. That's what my dad told me. He said Grandma was old, and the thing had struck her quickly and suddenly. She would have died fast and without pain, Dad said. She wouldn't have suffered. I knew better, though. Even as a 10-year-old kid, I knew better. And years later, writing this as an adult, I still know better. I also know my wife and kids resent me for refusing to have a shower in the house, for insisting everyone take baths. They pretend it's okay, and they humor me, but I can tell they don't really understand it. Not at all. My wife thinks she does. She thinks I still carry the trauma of seeing my grandmother dying in front of me when I was little. I guess she's right, in a way. But she doesn't know the full truth. Nobody does. And no one would believe me, even if I told them. No one would believe me if I said the reason I don't take showers, the reason I haven't had one since I was 10 years old, isn't because I'm scarred from the sight of a dead body. It's because all those years ago, when I crept back into the still hot bathroom after the paramedics had taken Grandma's body downstairs, I made sure to check the marks her fingers had carved through the steamed glass of the shower cubicle. And those marks weren't just on the inside.